Hello, my name is Ian Scales. You're watching TelecomTV, and joining me today is Yuval Dvir, who is the head of online and SMB partnerships at Google. Yuval, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on TelecomTV.
Of course.
Let me ask you for a start, Yuval. In your address today at the conference, you were talking about forging a new balance between the human and the machine in the workplace. Could you elaborate on that argument a little bit for me?
Yeah, I think what I've been seeing over the past sort of few years and decades is that we're bombarded with an avalanche of technology. We hear about digital transformation and other sort of elements, and what organizations tend to do is focus very much on the technical side, which is what triggers all this change. But in many cases, they forget that in order to succeed or materialize on the promise of the technology, there's the people side or the human side, as well as the organization side, that need to be resolved as well. So the balance that I'm talking about, as I mentioned initially in my talk, there's the technology which triggers all this change. There are the people, there's the business, and there's the organization. There needs to be some sort of new balance between all of that. So our focus is not going to be just on technical elements and machine learning, but also on the business, on society, and on people, because by using all that balance and by using those variables as inputs to any sort of decision that we make, that increases the chances or the probability of any sort of technology to have a positive, sustainable impact.
I suppose what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years in particular is the consumerisation of this technology to a certain extent. And to do that, you've got to get away from the technology, as you were talking about up there, get away from the protocols and everything. And I think certain companies, including Google, have made a success of that. Is there lessons to be learned that can be moved over to perhaps the workplace from those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is completely right. I see also in a way, consumerization of the workplace, because in the past you would go into your company and you would expect to have the best technological tools out there, the best computers, the best mobile, the best machines. In some organizations that's still the case, but in many other organizations, actually the tools that you have back home, the technology that you interact and deal with at home is much more advanced than when you get back to the office, and that's a big restraint on sort of progress. So there needs to be, that's another element of balance, right? The balance between understanding that, times have changed and technology now is available to people in their lives as well. And people actually don't change, and we shouldn't sort of start to continue pigeonholing people. You're an employee at work and you're your own personal person in the work, in your personal life. But we're exactly the same people with the same sort of needs, same sort of requirements, and the interaction with technology is an important element of that. And I think organizations have not really changed to accommodate and to cater to that. Gig economy is another element. I showed the table over there inspired by HubSpot in terms of what's important to employees nowadays as opposed to in the past. People want more flexibility, want more purpose, want more impact. And organizations need to take that into consideration. Now,
when you're viewing the IoT industry as it's evolving today, can you see these mistakes being done again, and whereabouts? What should we watch out for and try and avoid in terms of the way we're deploying IoT technology?
It's like any sort of new technology. I mean, the big data is a massive thing. It's definitely a massive part, obviously, of IoT. But you hear every once in a while articles that organizations fail on their big data projects or negative ROI and other sort of elements. The whole idea is not to get IoT into that sort of path as well and start hearing those words, because sometimes what's communicated or what's perceived has a material impact on eventually the direction of it. Now, I do believe that eventually IoT and big data are the future, and how we manage that is going to determine how fast we get there. So in order to ensure that the buzzwords become more than just buzzwords and provide material value, then we really need to sort of focus on those areas and understand, get away from the buzzwords and don't fall into the trap. And how that happens is we start off, what sort of the business, what's the outcome that we want to get, what are the current capabilities that we have, how do we bridge those gaps, who do we partner with that has that experience, and in the core of all that, how do we innovate, how do we think about changing or utilizing this new technology for new services and products, and having the managerial responsibility to provide that empowerment and freedom while the organization tests and launches and iterates those solutions.
So in some ways, you know, the introduction of IoT as a project within a company is really a kind of constructing a platform on which you can innovate, rather than something which is going to provide return on investment in its own right. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, there's a balance over there as well. There's a balance between, you know, we want to innovate, we want to change because organizations need to do that. And if the recent history have taught us something, is that organizations that don't in a way innovate or even cannibalize themselves, somebody else will. And there's a balance of aligning the organizations and metrics and revenue and all that, because if you innovate non-stop and don't provide the value to the organization, that organization eventually needs to die. How you strike that balance is different between different organizations. Some have more resources and capacity, some don't. And again, each organization has their own specific DNA and people, and according to that you need to decide. But those two elements should be part of that. So you can't brush off completely ROI in the same way that you can't brush off the fact that you need to provide enough time to incubate an idea and bring it to market.
Now, can you think of any examples, maybe even in your own past working life, where that joint has failed and, you know, you can point to it as something to avoid?
When I talk about digital transformation, I mean, back in the days at Skype, we initiated on a data-driven transformation to make the organization as data-driven as possible, make all decisions data-driven, which in it itself is some sort of an issue, because organizations need to be well-informed as opposed to just data-driven. Data is just one part, I guess our intuition, and the other element is also a crucial part. So we did focus very much on the technical side, on the telemetry, on the infrastructure, but eventually we didn't get sort of the business result that we wanted. We didn't get the PMs working according to that data and making those decisions better for our consumers. And it's only when we added the dimension of the cultural transformation as well, having both sort of agile coaches that explain sort of the agile methodology, not just in terms of development, but also the management, having a communication expert, behaviors, and so on, and collaborated very closely with the engineers and the product and marketing and all parts of the organization. That's when we really got the ball rolling. And that was a great demonstration of how if you change the balance just a bit, then you could ensure that you get everyone on the boat as opposed to just a specific area of the organization. And that's just, you know, my own example.
No, that's good. And I mean, are there any specific things that we've got to watch out for and avoid in the way that we're developing the technology now? How would you point to specific examples?
Well, I mean, it all starts also from, you know, the specific idea or organization that you have. We always say that you need to focus on what you do best, your own differentiation in the market, and whatever you consider a commodity as something that is not your core strength, try to partner or outsource that, because that could expedite the time that the products and services that you create can reach the market. And aside from that, it's like a lot of other sort of technologies. I mean, there's a lot of pitfalls in it, from the management layer, the cultural layer, or the outcomes, different sort of assumptions that you take into place, multiple sort of variables that change between organizations. So you just need to keep tabs on that and ensure that you are on a path, on a journey, and even if it skews from one side to the other every once in a while, that's allowed, and that's good. The other thing is to understand that your initial idea or hypothesis may be completely wrong along that journey, and be able to pivot is also important. And that's, again, another sort of balance, because you need to have the conviction in order to be able to surpass all the challenges that are going to be thrown at you, from people saying that your idea isn't worth anything, from people internally, from the market itself, that it can go a downturn or a competitor. So you need that conviction to go through that, but also you need that humility to understand that sometimes when you do need to pivot, you do really need to pivot. Yes. and go a separate way in order to get to the promised land.
Yes. Go fast and fail early, that type of thing. Well, I think that's a particular problem in the telecom industry, where they're not really used to doing that. Their idea is that you do everything properly and you take time and you do it, and anything that doesn't work is a big failure and should be sort of covered up.
Well, in some industries, and I mean, I'm not saying don't plan. You definitely need a plan, but you need to be agile on it. But in some industries, especially sort of resource heavy, then sometimes you are there for the long haul, and it's very much sort of an infrastructure sort of business, and you can't sort of pivot every once in a while. We're talking about when small companies or SMBs or any sort of a software-based application, they can pivot sort of faster. So in those cases, yes, you need to kind of have a plan and stand to it. But again, even with that, there is room for agility or the agile mindset and lean mindset as well.
What's the courage to say, oh, that didn't quite work, we're going to try a different approach?
Yeah.
You know. Well, look, Yuval, it's been very useful, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.